This is basically the GTA 3 we never got.
Why would you say something so controversial yet so brave?
So out of all the games that I planned on covering for this marathon, Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars was probably the one I was the most curious about. Reason for it was simple. We're going back to the series' roots with its top-down perspective. Well, that and that this game was originally made from the Nintendo DS. Which, don't get me wrong, I loved playing me some Pokemon Black and White too, and some new Super Mario Bros. Back in the day. But the idea of putting GTA on a handheld at the time just seemed, I don't know, weird when I first heard it. Like, I was aware of the Stories games on PSP, and even though I originally thought that those were just ports of 3 and Vice City, I could still understand the appeal behind them because, I mean, come on, it's still a GTA game, right? Chinatown Wars, when I first became aware of it, just sort of looked like a cheap filler side game that was kinda skippable. So that's what I did. And it didn't look like I was alone in thinking that too, considering the game seemingly really underperformed when it came to its sales. After this game came out, I really didn't hear too much else about it either, so I just sort of assumed it was another mid-game with a big IP attached to it that just got lost in the sea of shovelware that made up the majority of the DS's library. Well, don't I look fucking stupid. Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars was released in March of 2009 to the Nintendo DS before also making its way to the PSP in October, with an iOS port coming the following year. And for a long time, like I said, I never really heard anybody talking about this game. It seemed like initially it left a pretty small impact, even though it did review pretty well, and it did receive a number of awards. But as the years went on, I found more and more people often citing Chinatown Wars as an incredibly underrated game, and one that stands out as one of the best games in the DS's library. I wouldn't say it had the cult-like status of some games that got popular later on, like Earthbound or Psychonauts or anything. But retroactively speaking, I was hearing way more praise for this game in the present than I ever did when it was still new. These types of games are always interesting to me, and I'll just say that I don't think Chinatown Wars necessarily was ahead of its time or anything, but more that it was just always a solid-ass video game that, when it came out, it just never really got the time of day. Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars was a really fun experience for me to play from start to finish. Like, there are definitely a ton of compromises brought in from both the design decisions as well as the hardware limitations, so it really isn't perfect. But this game also does some really fun stuff that I'm surprised haven't been done in any GTA game before or since. This game, in my opinion, handily takes many of the gameplay improvements brought in from the 3D entries and brings them back to the series' top-down roots. And surprisingly enough, I think Chinatown Wars actually does a couple things better than any other game in the series, which, trust me, I've played most of them now. That was crazy for me to think about too. Also, just a heads up before we jump into this video, I'm going to be playing the PSP version of this game through an emulator for this one. This looks to be the head and shoulders superior version of the game here, given the PSP's superior graphical capabilities, the several new mission additions that were added, and of course the ability to play some of the minigames without touch controls. Thank God. We've got a lot to discuss today, so without further ado, this is my review for Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars. If there's one thing I can say is easily my least favorite thing about this game, it would probably have to relate to the story. So in Chinatown Wars, you play as Hong Li, a wealthy son of a recently murdered triad boss. You've been tasked with delivering the sword passed down through his family, and by passed down I mean won by your father in a poker game, so it's been around for exactly one generation, to the newest patriarchal leader of the family, your uncle, Wu Li, who goes by Kenny. Upon arriving in Liberty City, Hong's entourage is killed, and he gets shot and left for dead, and also the sword gets stolen. After Hong reunites with his uncle reveals that he was planning on giving the sword to the local triad boss, Xin Jiaoming, since he looks to be on his way out and will need a replacement soon. This essentially sets emotions in the events of Hong trying to keep his uncle's businesses alive, while also hopefully tracking down the people who tried to have him assassinated. It's exactly who you think it is. Now, I don't think this game has an awful story by any means, but it doesn't really do too much to set itself apart from, well, any of the other stories that we've seen in the series so far. Like, it's kind of cool that we get to see a bit more things from the Triad perspective, but we also kind of got a decent amount of that in GTA 3, and even a little bit in 2 as well. Other than that, it's your pretty basic revenge plot that we've seen a number of times throughout the franchise. And while this one does add a bit of mystery in regards to who orchestrated the initial murders, you can almost see that the plot is going to take a very similar structure to what happened in Vice City, or hell, if you've ever watched The Lion King, you know exactly who's really behind this. Which, you know, it's fine. I'm not exactly expecting super complex storytelling from a handheld game from 2009, unless it was like an RPG or some shit. However, that being said, I did find myself pretty bored whenever a new cutscene would play. I think the main reason here has to be the presentation. So you know how most GTA games have this sort of comic book style picture collage on the front cover? Well, Chinatown Wars actually takes it a step beyond and has that be the primary way the game illustrates its narrative. All the cutscenes in this game are shown through readable dialogue accompanied by still images, and if I'm being honest with you, my eyes started to gloss over these. Like, I really like the art style here with the thick outlines, but I just wish we kinda had something a little bit more animated here, like you would see with a lot more visual novels. Sometimes the presentation does work, particularly when having characters react to shocking moments, a few of these actually getting a genuine laugh out of me. But those moments are pretty few and far between. The writing doesn't really help in this regard either. Since we don't really have much animation or movement in general to display what characters are thinking or feeling, we have to rely solely on dialogue. The problem with this is the writing here is really only going for the more lowbrow shock humor than anything else, and it's pretty dated to say the least. All the GTA games kind of have this dated quality to a lot of what they let fly, but this one I have a bit more of an issue with, since it's primarily the main thing we see with the dialogue, while the other games at least have a little bit more to sink your teeth into. When you factor in all these things together, I slowly lost more and more interest in the game's story as it went on, and with the game being around 10 or so hours, you can imagine by the end of things, the thought of skipping cutscenes was very much in the front of my mind, just so I can get to the parts of the game that I actually enjoyed. Not a great start for talking about this game, but hear me out. Everything gets much better from here on in. This is especially true for the gameplay, because goddamn if they didn't finally perfect the top-down perspective ideas that they started nearly 20 years prior. The key turning point for the GTA series was when GTA 3 made the bold decision to jump to the third-person open-world style of game that we were all familiar with by now. This franchise made that change and never looked back, outside of the GTA game for the GBA, which, yeah, I really don't want to talk about that one, please. So to some, it might be a bit of a head-scratcher as to why they would want to return to the top-down formula since GTA had really found its core audience by this point. Well, what if I told you that Chinatown Wars actually takes a lot of the lessons that they learned from 3D entries and then applies them to the formula that they established in the first two GTA games, but also removed a bunch of the janky bullshit from those earlier titles? Sounds kind of interesting, right? Well, yeah, that's basically what Chinatown Wars is. For example, when it comes to the basic controls, the absolutely abysmal tank controls are gone in favor of something that's a lot more natural. Thank God. You can now also sprint, mantle over objects, hell, you even have a dodge roll like it's a fucking Zelda game. Spoiler for the next marathon, by the way. Combat is also vastly improved from the older entries, with a much more clear lock-on mechanic that allows for easier target switching. There are a ton of weapons here that you've seen a bunch of times before, with my favorite overall weapon probably being the sword, since it's a one-hit kill and it's just fun cleaving through waves of goons. Do yourself a favor though, and change the option from switching to a new weapon upon pickup to off, since it can be a bit disorienting otherwise. Enemy AI in this game is also thankfully far less aggressive than the other top-down games, so difficulty-wise, it was a pretty smooth ride throughout. Speaking of smooth rides here, how about the driving in this game? This, for the most part, is pretty damn good. There are a couple vehicles that handle a bit worse than others, especially motorcycles. Like, why'd they take that inspiration from GTA 4? Jesus Christ. Other than that, though, driving's pretty damn good. I was actually also surprised to see that we have some drivable boats in this game. No luck on the aircraft front, though, outside of one mission where you fly in a helicopter, but even then you can't actually control it. Driving around Liberty City in this game, you'll probably also notice some pretty similar things with this map, since it's basically a one-to-one recreation of GTA 4's Liberty City, scaled down to fit on a handheld, minus the final island. That is pretty damn impressive, and honestly, when I was researching for this video, I didn't really believe that it was true at first, since there really isn't a sense of elevation in this game. I didn't really notice that it was the exact same map at first. But as I played more and more, I started recognizing different landmarks that I had just seen when I played GTA 4, and I thought to myself, wow, that is really damn cool. And they even toned down the annoyingness factor of toll booths, so hey, pretty happy in that regard. Oh yeah, and they also increased the number of potential safe houses here too, which, given that sometimes you need to bring stuff back to, makes it very convenient to have several of. The city looks great too, being fully rendered in 3D, but seeing all the character models as 2D kind of clashes a bit here. And then all the music that you get when you're driving around is really solid too. You get a ton of original compositions from Deadmau5, Tortoise, Anvil, and The Alchemist. Nothing that you'd ever find outside of this game, but there are honestly some pretty solid tracks here that have my vote for the best GTA original pieces of music that the series has seen so far. Then there's the mission design. Goddamn, they really hit it out of the park with this one. Honestly, I think these might be the best lineup of missions outside of maybe San Andreas full stop, which is something I was really not expecting. I think you guys can probably tell by now that I have a sort of preference to how GTA games handle their missions, where they have like a random mechanic that just shows up once that's way more deep than it needs to be, and then it just disappears for the rest of the game because fuck it, it's just for fun, right? It's why I love games like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and why I always had a fascination with the Yakuza franchise. Should I play those games? Are those games really good? Anyway, Chinatown Wars goes absolutely crazy with the mission variety. You have missions where you use sonar to locate things underwater, missions where you are a sniper from a top-down perspective, missions where you have to burn down a bunch of weed plants inside of an apartment, missions where you throw Molotov cocktails out of a helicopter. Hell, you can even replay the missions in this game now if you select the option to in your safe house, which was such a surprising feature since no other game in the series has done that before or since. Like, that's kind of a no-brainer to me, right? I will say, if I had one complaint, there are a few too many missions where you have to stay close to a fleeing car that would have you fail if they got too far away, which is a lot easier to do in a top-down perspective than 3D, but that's a pretty minor complaint overall. Everything else here, it's all so good, man. This easily ranks near the top of the mountain when it comes to its mission design. So yeah, pretty high marks for me when it comes to the standard gameplay, but there are a couple other aspects of the game that I want to highlight real quick too. Mainly being how you go about performing crimes, as well as a number of the minigames. First up, we have committing crimes. I kind of made this a broad category as it contains everything from evading the police, buying weapons, destroying security cameras, and also selling drugs.
Wait, what?
Yeah, you heard me right. You can sell drugs in this game. And let me tell you, this system has a surprising amount of depth to it. So the economy in Chinatown Wars is a bit interesting. While you can make some money by completing some missions or side activities, you really won't make that much. Instead, the game actively encourages you to have your money work for you as you purchase drugs from various street dealers and then flip them for profit. This is how you make the majority of your cash for purchasing weapons and safe houses, and let me just say, this might be my absolute favorite side mechanic any GTA game has introduced up until this point. And no, this has nothing to do with the fact that I'm a total fucking degenerate. As you travel through the open world, you occasionally run into drug dealers who you can buy a bunch of stuff from, such as weed, pills, acid, ecstasy, coke, and even heroin. Hey YouTube, please don't age restrict this video. When purchasing, you are shown if you're being given a good deal or if the prices being offered are a little bit higher than average. Then after you make your purchase, off you go to find the next dealer to try to turn a profit. What's really cool is if you open up your PDA, you can actually see little gang territories where different dealers occupy that typically sell particular drugs. Or hell, sometimes you get lucky and immediately turn around to sell the same shit you just bought from the guy at a markup. Yeah, there you go, bro. Enjoy. Tell your people about me. Sometimes you'll even get little tip-offs in your email about certain dealers in town who either are selling low or buying high for particular items for a limited amount of time. So this is all pretty cool, but there's also a bit of a risk-reward factor to it too. See, you have a drug bag that can only carry a max of 50 of whatever your drug total is. So you have to pick and choose what you want to carry. And if you're caught by the police, they'll confiscate everything upon arrest and then let you go regardless of the fact that you were carrying enough Schedule 1 drugs to kill a full-grown mammoth. At your safe house, though, you always have a place to stash your drugs that you may not want to carry at the time that will always remain safe. Now, there's also times that you'll need to bring particular drugs to a quest giver in order to progress, or you'll need to have a certain amount of money, so this system is something you can't really ignore like you could with the empire building in Vice City stories, for example. But you know, that's fine. I think this has a ton of depth to it, and it's something you can always do on your way to doing something else, so it's really not as intrusive as the gang territories in San Andreas or the relationship building in 4. There are even other things to make this an even more interesting side activity, such as having certain vehicles being able to be stolen and brought back to your safe house to extract the drugs from them, or the fact that you will occasionally get busted by the cops in the middle of a deal. Even then, by destroying the security cameras found around the map, which is basically the replacements from the pigeons from GTA 4, you can lower the chance of getting busted while also increasing your capital from sales, which is a much more worthwhile reward. Now, if you do get seen by the cops, you will have to find a way to evade them, which is completely different in this game than any previous GTA. You could still remain hidden or go through a paint shop, but now you are given a number of police vehicles to destroy to lower your wanted level in a tier-based system. This means if you are at a wanted level of 3, you need to destroy 3 police cruisers to drop down to a wanted level of 2, and then so on. Why destroying a bunch of police vehicles makes the police just give up? I think it works from a top-down perspective though. No real complaints here other than the fact that you do have to do this quite a bit because, literally it seems like 1 out of every 5 cars in this game is a cop, so you'll probably spend a good amount of time in this game wanted. And lastly, there's getting weapons. So while you can always loot weapons from corpses, it seems like all the ammunition stores have moved to an online presence this time around, which is kind of convenient, I suppose, since you can just order weapons online and have them delivered straight to the nearest safe house. You can access all of this through your PDA, which essentially is a hybrid of the phone and email systems from GTA 4. Not much else to talk about with this, but I have to say, this might actually be one of the most fun GTA games when it comes to the actual side content. And then that brings us to the minigame selection, with a number of them being touchscreen in the case of the DS version, but they still exist in both. Now, touchscreen minigames typically end up being these really gimmicky mechanics on these much larger style games. So how do they play out here? Pretty gimmicky. And as I said earlier, I'm playing the PSP version on an emulator, so I was spared of having to do these with a stylus, but these minigames are basically inescapable in Chinatown Wars. If you want to dig through a dumpster to find a gun, you gotta press the buttons to remove the trash. If you want to break a lock, you gotta press the buttons to smash it open. If you want to use a sniper, you have to load it and set up the scope. You pretty much get the point here. It's really not that bad, mostly harmless, and the instances where you have the comic outline to come illustrate the QTEs does add a bit to the game's style. Some of the other minigames, though, are a bit more involved, like cutting out the back of a van to get a weapon. Good luck being able to drive this in a straight line with an analog stick. This shit is not like an Etch-a-Sketch. Or having to fill containers of gasoline for Molotov cocktails. You'd probably have an easier time trying to piss in a bottle while you're drunk, which actually that's kind of what this looks like now that I think about it. The most in-depth that these really get is when it comes to hijacking cars. This time around, if you see a vehicle on the streets that has someone that isn't already driving it and you want to steal it, you gotta hotwire that shit with a minigame. Now the older vehicles aren't too bad. Rotate the analog stick here to unscrew a panel and rewire some things there, and boom, you're good to go. The newer cars can go fuck themselves. These have this number stopping minigame, and call me a casual if you want, but I could just knock at the timing down on these things to save my life. And I mean that in a literal sense, since while you're hijacking vehicles, you can still be shot at by enemies or arrested by the cops. So yeah, you have to do these minigames quickly too. And you can't back out of them either, so hopefully you nail these things down, because otherwise you're gonna get screwed frequently. And it probably sounds like I'm making a big deal out of these minigames that essentially get resolved in like 10 seconds or less usually. This game is chock full of them, so you'll be experiencing them frequently. It's not god-awful, but I definitely think there could have been some improvements made here, since this remains as the only large blemish on an otherwise really solid gameplay experience. Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars really surprised me. I went into this expecting to have an okay time, but what I found was a game that really feels right at home being in the conversation as one of the strongest DS and PSP games in either of the consoles' catalogs. I thought that recreating GTA 4's Liberty City was technically remarkable. The mission design was ridiculously inventive, selling drugs to people never got boring, and this was the perfection of the top-down multi-directional shooter formula that we saw back on the original PlayStation. However, while I think Chinatown Wars is overall good, there are a number of things that are also holding this game back from being great. The flat story and presentation can make it really hard to keep paying attention, and the over-reliance on gimmicky motion-controlled minigames can get kind of annoying at times. While I overall enjoyed my time here, I also can't really say that this game competes with many of the other games that I've covered up to this point. It's undoubtedly better than the first 2 GTAs, especially GTA 1, which the more of these games that I played, the worse it makes that game look. And I'd say I probably had more fun with this one than Liberty City Stories, since I mean, I covered that game like a month ago and I barely remember anything about it. This game gets a pretty solid recommendation from me. Give it a try if you've ever been curious. It's honestly a bit of an underrated gem. But that's all the time I have for you guys today. Thank you for watching. What was your favorite memory of Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars? Please be sure to leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. And hey, if you enjoyed today's video, maybe consider giving it a like and subscribing. Thank you guys again. I'll catch you in the next video.